Hello and welcome back to part 4 of the Astro crash course where we're going to build out our blog website. In previous videos, we got the basic setup of our application, and today we're going to start working on pulling data from our Strapi backend. So we're going to take a look how to fetch data in Astro and how to display it in our application. If you haven't seen previous videos, please go check them out. But without any ado, let's jump right into it. Now, I already have my Astro frontend running, but we want to start using our API. So the first thing we're going to do in your Astro crash course project that we're working on, you should have installed your Strapi backend so you could navigate to it by changing directories into server, and you can run your backend by running yarn dev. Now, little fun fact, have you been sick and tired when you start an application and you're like, I have it running already somewhere else? Well, how can you terminate it without figuring out where it is? Well, you could do ls off command with ti flag, and you could say 1337. This is going to go ahead and list the ID where that service is running. I'm too tired of trying to find it, and so I could just look it up this way, and then I could do kill and add the ID of that reference. Click enter, and now everything's all set. And if I run yarn dev again, I'm not going to have that annoying problem because I'm too busy trying to figure out where I'm running another application. I'm always running stuff. Well, that's a quick tip for you guys. So now we navigate to our Strapi application. Is going to open at localhost 1337. If you've been following along from the first video, you will have your data already present here because in the first video, we took a look how to set everything up. And today we're going to take a look how to load our data for our global page, which includes our banner. That's what we're going to focus on today, our header and our footer. If you go into settings into roles, in users permissions roles, you're going to see that we have authenticated and public. We're just going to start with public first to keep things simple. And if you take a look, on the global, you already going to have the find permission checked. If it's not, go ahead and do that. Click save. And now you're able to get all this data from our API/global endpoint. So if I copy that, and VS Code, I have this dandy Postman plugin. And what I could do is create a new HTTP request and look up HTTP localhost 1337 API global. If I send that request, we will see that we're getting our global page data that we know that our API works. So now let's take a look how we could get this data from our Strapi application in our Astro project. Since we are starting displaying our header and footer and our banner data, it makes sense to start in our layout. So make sure in your Astro project, in the source folder, in layout, you navigate to your layout.astro file. And we're going to start our work here in the front matter. This is where your JavaScript runs on the server, and this is where we could make our request. Now, I do want to make a call out. Astro has the Astro content loader that allows you to get data, including from within the Astro application or external APIs. And this is something we're going to cover later in the course. But I do want to show you the most basic way of fetching data first. And then you could pick the option that you want, or at least be aware of all the options that exist. Also, using the Astro Content Loader API, I created with the community. Big shout out to Colby and Kellen for being a huge help, helping me to update and improve this loader that we're able to use to fetch our data from our Strapi application. And for each different aspect of our app, we'll use slightly different strategy so you're aware of all of them. But for now, we're going to start with the most simplest way of doing it, which is also valid. We're going to start very simple, and we're going to create an async function, and we're going to call it get Strapi global data. And right now, we're just going to do it really quickly, but eventually we're going to add our types later in the video. All we're going to do is make a basic fetch request. So we're going to say const response equals await fetch. And here we're going to pass our URL to which we're making the request. It is the same URL we just checked. So we're going to copy HTTP localhost 1337 API global. And back in our Astro layout, let's go ahead and paste it in. Perfect. once we get our response, we want to pull the data out. So we're going to say const data equals await response.json. And now what we're going to do, we're just going to console log our response. And for this, we're going to use console dir. We're going to pass in our data, and we're going to say depth is null. So it's going to go ahead and show our whole complete object in our response. And in order to see it, we just have to go ahead and call this function. I'm going to say await get Strapi global data. And because we're running this function, it's going to go ahead and hit this console log. So let's take a look in our terminal. And boom, you could see that we have our data coming from our API. That is awesome. So we know our API works as expected. Now, if we wanted to show this data on our front end, it's super easy. Here, we're just going to say const global data equals await get Strapi global data. And right now, I'm going to comment out the slot, which is basically going to remove showing our children that we're passing. We'll just see our header and footer. And for now, right above it, we are just going to use a pre-tag. And inside, we'll just do a whole dump of the content using JSON stringify, passing our global data. And we don't see it because sometimes I'm an idiot. Remember, when you have a function and you're doing something in that function, you do need to return it. So we're going to say return data. Boom. And now that we're actually returning data from our function, we will have access here. And that's going to be displayed on our front end. And sure enough, we could see that we're getting our data. So now we know how easily you're able to get data in your Astro application. Let's do some quality of life improvements. Maybe hard coding the base URL doesn't make sense. So we could make one simple change. And I'll show you the pattern that I like to do. Right above our function, I'm going to say const base API URL equals, and we're either going to have a env variable, which we could get access to using import meta.env. And because we're using Vite, you have to make sure that you use the convention Vite and the name of what you want. And we're going to call it Strapi base URL. And we are going to add a fallback. If that doesn't exist, we're going to use the HTTP localhost, just like so. Nice. Now inside our get Strapi global data, we could say const path, and it's going to be equal to our path, which is going to be API global. And finally, we're going to go const URL, which is going to equal to new URL. And I like constructing URLs this way, especially if you need to pass params or do something. In addition, I like to do it this way. We're going to add path, and we're going to pass our base API URL. And we could actually move this inside the function to make it much more cleaner. And maybe eventually we'll move this out to its own function. And now instead of fetching and hard coding our value, we have a little bit more flexibility. We could say url.href, and everything should still work as expected. So if I take a look here, notice we have our data. But one thing you're going to notice, if I hover over global data, we don't have any TypeScript. We just have any. So let's start thinking about how we could add some TypeScript to make this much easier. To start, we're going to create a basic Strapi response type. And this is going to be based on the response that we get from Strapi, which consists of data, meta, and error. So let's go ahead and do that first. For now, because this is going to be used for get Strapi global data, we could actually keep it here within this file. So we're going to make a generic type that's going to give us initial types for any Strapi response that we may have. And for now, we're going to make the file here, but eventually we could move it. So we're going to say type. And what I started to do, if it's a type or an interface, I like to use a capital T or a capital I to make it easier for me to find things in code. It also prevents naming collisions. For instance, if you have banner versus T banner, you know one is a type and one is a component. But we're going to call this Strapi response. we're going to say t equals null. And here we're going to define our initial types. We are going to have a Boolean success, which will make it easier for us to check if the response was successful or not. This is not part of the Strapi response, but we're going to add it here. Next, we have data, and we're going to say it's optional or null, and we're going to say t. And this will allow us to pass types into our Strapi response to type them accordingly. But here we're going to define our error, which has the following items: status, which is a number. Then we have name, which is a string. Then we have message, which is a string. And finally, we may have the details, which is going to be a record of a string array. After our error, we have our meta, and in Strapi, this is where you're going to have all your pagination information. And that's optional because if you do a single collection, there is no meta information, but if it's collections type, which will have many items, you would have the pagination data. So we're going to add it here. Let's say pagination, and it has page, which is a number. Then we have page size, which is also a number. Then we have page count, which is also a number. And finally, we have total, which is, again, a number. Nice. And now that we have our basic Strapi response, what we could say in our get Strapi global data, in order to give it slightly better typing, here we could say that this is a promise, and we're going to use the Strapi response type. And so this is a little bit better. And now if we navigate over global data, we could see that's a type of Strapi response, but this is not going to be specific enough because it's not going to tell us if it's a response of articles or our global data that we are receiving. So what we're going to do now is, based on this response structure, we're going to structure different types for our banner, our header, our nav items. We also have image type, and we have our link type. So let's go ahead and do those now. And to make this easier, what I'm going to do, inside the source folder, I'm going to create a new folder, and we're going to call it types. And I'm going to call this new file index.ts. And so you don't have to watch me, I'm going to go ahead and paste them. I prepared them ahead of time, but you could pause the screen and you can enter them in yourself. And so for our image type, we have ID, which is a number, document ID, which is a string, alternative text, could be a string or null, and then we have the URL of the image. Then for our link type, and if you're wondering how do I know what the structure of this is I am defining it based on our response. If you take a look at the response, for our links, we have ID, href label is external, is button link, and type. And here I'm basically using that information. And I know ID is a number. You could see here, ID is a number, href is a string, and I'm just doing the typing here based on the response from Strapi. So ID is number, href is a string, label is a string, is external is a Boolean, is button link is a Boolean, and type, it's going to be a string. For type logo link, it is just an ID, which is a number, a label, which is a string, href, which is a string, is external, which is Boolean. Image, we're using our type image that we created here above. And for the banner, we have the ID number, is visible Boolean, description string, link is our link. For header, our type has ID and number, logo, which is our logo link that we created above. Nav links is an array of our type of link that we created above, and CTA is also link. And for the footer, we have ID of number, text of string, logo is our logo link type we created above, and so on and so forth. And if you want to do a little practice based on your Strapi response that you get here, you could write the types yourself. But here, I just wanted to go over them quickly. Very standard practice. So now that we have all these types defined back in our layout, We have our Strapi response. And now we want to type our global data response. For this, and I think this was imported for me, we don't need this at the moment, but here at the top, we're going to import our custom types that we just created, which is going to be our T banner, our T header, and our T footer. And this is going to come from our types. Nice. And finally, let's go ahead and create our type definition for our global data. And I'm going to say type, and we're going to call it global data. And it's going to contain ID, which is a number. It also has a document ID, which is a string. Then we have our title, which is a string. After the title, we have our description, which is also a string. Then we have created at, string, published at, which is a string. And then we have our banner, which is type banner. We have our header, which is type header. And finally, we have our footer, which is type footer. And now that we have our global type data defined, what we could do is we could pass it down to our Strapi response. And now we should get all the typing from our types. So now what we could do is, let's say we're going to say const banner equals global data. And now if I do dot, notice that we have all of our types. So it's going to be data dot banner. And if I do dot, you could see that we have all the items from our banner, which is amazing. We're getting our types. And the last thing we're going to do here in this video, we're just going to say here, and we're going to remove this pre for now. And we're going to say if banner, then go ahead and display our banner. And for now, we're just going to do a placeholder, and we're just going to show banner dot description. And with that being said, if we go back to our application, we could see that we have our banner from Strapi. And what's awesome, if we go back to our backend, we go to our content manager, our global type, and you could see that we have banner visible as true or false. So we could actually make this false for now, click publish, and in our application, instead of just checking for banner, we could say is banner is visible. And if banner is visible, go ahead, show our banner. Notice here, we set it to false. We saved our changes. So if we take a look here, look, we don't see our banner. The banner is gone. If we go to Strapi and we set it for true and click publish and refresh our application, notice our banner is showing up. So I know this video was a little bit on the longer side, but what we did is we took a look how to fetch data in Strapi. We did it the most basic way, which is literally in the front matter, calling fetch and getting our data. And once we have our data, we're able to display it inside our code. And to give it typing, we went ahead, typed our response, then we made a placeholder for data. So that way, based on the type of data we get, for instance, in our case was global data, we're able to pass the types to our Strapi response, to the placeholder, and get the appropriate IntelliSense based on the data that we get. So if we take a look here, so that way, if we do global data dot dot, we have all of our type completion. If we go one level into data and we want to see the header, and we could see that we have all the items already available, which makes it much easier for us to use our data in our application. So finally, in the next video, we're going to go ahead and build out our banner component that's going to display our banner data. Man, that was a little bit on the longer side, but thank you so much for sticking with me, and I will see you in the next video. By the way, just a reminder, as I continue making these lessons, I am creating separate branch for each lesson. For instance, today we worked on lesson 004. And if you want to compare what you have so far, and before we do that, let me just do get status, get add, get commit message. I'm going to say loading data. I'm going to clear the screen so it's easier to see. And I'm going to push this branch to origin 004. And if you go to my repo, github.com, Paul Basovsky, Astro/Strapi/crash course, and you click the main, you're going to see all the commits for each lesson. So for today's lesson, if you go to the lesson, you will be able to see all the code changes we did. For instance, if I go to source, take a look at our layouts and click our layout Astro, you could see that you have all the changes of what we did today. So this way is an easy way for you to compare your code or find any code snippets that we have. And as I get farther down along in this lessons, I will make a separate repo with all the notes, and I'll make sure to add them to the description. But for now, this is where you could find all the previous lessons and all the code examples to compare with yours. But with that being said, take another break and I'll see you in a little bit.